This is TWiT.
Did Apple help the NSA attack the Kremlin? It should have been given the subheading, "Why does anyone take anything Russia says with even a grain of salt?" Now, I was unable to read the original. I've got the link in the show notes, but it's, it's HTTP, right? Because Russia doesn't believe in S, / and then www.fsb.ru, and the rest is in Russian. So, and it didn't seem worth bothering to get it translated because I was able to use the translation from the Risky Business newsletter. So I'm going to rely on that. And here's what Risky Business explained. Russia's FSB intelligence service claims to have uncovered a U.S. intelligence operation that hacked the Apple smartphones of diplomatic missions and embassies in Russia. The operation allegedly targeted thousands of devices, including the devices of Russian citizens and diplomatic representatives from NATO countries, the post-Soviet bloc, Israel, China, and South Africa. The attacks exploited a vulnerability in Apple smartphones. The FSB attributed the hacks to the U.S. National Security Agency and claimed Apple cooperated with the NSA for the attacks. And actually, it was that allegation that caught my attention since, well, that would be huge if it turned out to be true, which seems unlikely in the extreme to me, given everything we know about Apple and, fortunately, the country that we still live in. Anyway, Risky Business continues saying, the Russian cybersecurity firm Kaspersky says the same attacks, which the company tracks as Operation Triangulation, also targeted its employees. Kaspersky said they found compromised devices as far back as 2019 and said that the attacks are still ongoing. According to Kaspersky and to a technical report released by FSB's National Coordination Center for Computer Incidents, the attacks involve an iOS zero-click exploit delivered as a file attachment via iMessage. The attachment executes without user interaction as soon as it arrives on a device and starts downloading additional files. Kaspersky described the final payload as a fully featured APT, Advanced Persistent Threat platform. Unlike the FSB, Kaspersky did not link the activity to the NSA or any other APT group and could not say if the attacks targeted other organizations. News of the attacks came after, in March, the Kremlin's security team instructed their presidential staff to dump their iPhones by April 1st, 2023, coincidentally April Fool's Day. And we talked about that Kremlin activity at the time on the podcast. Employees of the Kremlin were told to get an Android device, either from a Chinese vendor or one running Rostelecom's Aurora OS. Kremlin officials cited security considerations for their decision, claiming iPhones were, quote, more susceptible to hacking and espionage by Western experts compared to other smartphones, unquote, which is not supported by any evidence we've seen. Russian officials asked the Prosecutor General's office to start a formal investigation into Apple employees and U.S. intelligence officials. Okay, right. Okay, and unsurprisingly, in an email that the Risky Business newsletter received after its initial publication of this news, Apple formally denied the FSB's accusations, writing, quote, "We have never worked with any government to insert a backdoor into any Apple product, and we never will," unquote. And as I said earlier, given the entire history of Apple's actions and the design of their devices, which we have often examined as closely as we could, I certainly believe Apple's assertion, far more than the Kremlin and the FSB, who we catch frequently spewing state-sponsored propaganda. Okay, now that said, if Kaspersky first saw this attack as early as 2019, assuming that the same zero-click exploit was in use then as in use now, that would suggest that an exploit has remained undiscovered for the past 4 years. So I was interested in additional details and something that, an actual security firm did in terms of research. So I tracked down Kaspersky's thoughts about this. They wrote, while monitoring the network traffic of our own corporate Wi-Fi network dedicated for mobile devices using the Kaspersky United Monitoring and Analysis Platform, which they call KUMA, K-U-M-A, we noticed suspicious activity that originated from several iOS-based phones. Since it is impossible to inspect modern iOS devices from the inside, we created offline backups of the devices in question, inspected them using the mobile verification toolkits, and discovered traces of compromise. We're calling this campaign Operation Triangulation, and all the related information we have on it will be collected on the Operation Triangulation page. If you have any additional details to share, please contact us at triangulation@kaspersky.com. Mobile device backups, they wrote, contain a partial copy of the file system, including some of the user data and service databases. The timestamps of the files, folders, and the database records allow the rough reconstruction of the events happening to the device. The MVT-iOS utility produces a sorted timeline of events into a file called timeline.csv, similar to a super timeline used by conventional digital forensic tools. Using this timeline, we were able to identify specific artifacts that indicate the compromise. This allowed us to move the research forward and to reconstruct the general infection sequence. 1. The target iOS device receives a message via the iMessage service with an attachment containing an exploit. 2. Without any user interaction, the message triggers a vulnerability that leads to code execution.
A zero-click.
Yes. Third, the code within the exploit downloads several subsequent stages from the command and control server that include additional exploits for privilege escalation. Fourth, after successful exploitation, a final payload, a fully featured APT platform, is downloaded from the command and control server. And fourth, both the initial message and the exploit in the attachment are deleted. They said, finishing, the malicious toolset does not support persistence, most likely due to the limitations of the OS, or actually the strength of the protections of that iOS is giving us. So it's living in RAM, no persistence. The timelines of multiple devices indicate that they may be reinfected after rebooting. The oldest traces of infection that we discovered happened in 2019. Okay, now, so that's a correction to what my initial presumption was. I had presumed they first saw this in 2019. No, in looking back at forensic evidence that was being collected, the oldest traces of the infection they discovered in their records occurred in 2019. As of the time of writing, they said in June 2023, so that's now, the attack is ongoing, and the most recent version of the devices successfully targeted is iOS 15.7. So also current iOS. The analysis of, well, almost current. The analysis of the final payload is not finished yet. The code is run with root privileges, implements a set of commands for collecting system and user information, and can run arbitrary code downloaded as plugin modules from the command and control server. Okay, so one of the things that gives this apparently long-running attack campaign so much power and longevity is, as Kaspersky wrote, quote, "It is impossible to inspect modern iOS devices from the inside, so we created offline backups of the devices in question," unquote. To that observation, we add the fact that this exploit fully covers its own tracks by deleting the exploitive attachment and the original attachment-carrying iMessage. Now add to that the fact that iMessage is end-to-end encrypted using private decryption keys that are only present in each of the endpoint device's secure enclaves, and that these attacks are all individually targeted at their victims. That means that communications traffic monitoring cannot be used, since all anyone on the outside, like Kaspersky, who wishes they could see what was going on, will ever see is pseudo-random noise flowing back and forth. Taken together, what all this means from a practical forensics and remediation standpoint is that this thing can never be caught. And that brings up an interesting point that has never been observed during the 17-plus years of this podcast, which is, to exactly the same degree that Apple's seriously super strong security is protecting the privacy of its users, it is equally protecting the privacy of exploits like this from discovery. Now, as we know, the Pegasus exploits are left behind in their targets' phones to later be discovered, reverse engineered, patched, eliminated, and rendered inert. But even as skilled a forensics team as Kaspersky can only observe an historical log of file modifications made by iPhone backups that indicate that something may have been happening to them and is happening now and for the past 4 years, with no idea by whom or to what end. And no one, Kaspersky or anyone else, can take this any farther. So I'll reiterate, since it seems like an important observation, to exactly the same degree that Apple's seriously super strong security is protecting the privacy of its users, it is equally protecting the privacy of exploits like this one from ever being discovered and eliminated.
You know, it's funny. I saw that same sentence when I read the story days ago. I didn't put two and two together. It's an interesting problem, though. But, I mean, you want them to have encrypted backups, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying that this is
it's
bad.
It's not a bad thing, but it does prevent the discovery of the provenance.
Yes.
Or removing it.
And so
yeah.
the difference here is that this thing can delete itself. And apparently the Pegasus exploits don't have that ability, or they certainly would.
Right.
You know, they get left behind, and then we can figure out who got attacked and what the attack was and what the exploit is, and we reverse engineer it, and Apple gives us an emergency iOS update so that none of us can have that happen to us, even though it's unlikely to because it's targeted. This thing is 4 years in duration, and it's like someone's got it, someone's using it,
right,
and iOS is protecting it.
Now, if the victim unlocked the phone for the forensic analysis, couldn't that make it possible or no?
The whole thing happens while the phone's
If it's
locked.
gone already, there's nothing you could do, right?
Right.
Yeah.
it's received, executes, downloads some stuff,
erases
and
itself.
immediately deletes itself.
Which is, by the way, a tale as old as time. I mean, that's what hackers have always done, is erase their tracks.
Right. You immediately remove your own intervention from the logs
Right.
in classic computer attacks.
Right.
But anyway, so something is out there, and
That's scary.
it is. And it can go and get anybody it wants, is what this amounts to. Anybody whose phone or iOS account is known can receive an iMessage, and in a blink of an eye, this thing is in and out and leaves behind a running advanced persistent threat alive in their phone until it's restarted that has apparently free reign.
Apple could implement some form of logging that would make note of this and not be addressable by the hack, I would think.
Yeah, I would think that's true.
Yeah, some sort of syslog that is, encrypted and protected. Maybe they should. I mean, that would solve it, right?
Or maybe, so do they know about this? It's been going on for 4 years. Yeah, I mean, they know now.
You're thinking as Russia is asserting that they do know about this and they're intentionally.
No. I still believe. I mean,
Apple wouldn't do that.
I don't think they would.
No, I know they wouldn't.
Everything we know about them says that no, NSA, you're going to have to find your own way in. And
they're not going to help the
maybe
FBI. They're not going to help the KGB.
Now, the way this might go away is just naturally. There could be some new features added to iMessage in iOS 17.
Right, that just happened to fix it.
Yes, exactly. They do a recompile or they re-implement it, and it breaks the thing that they were using for so long. On the other hand, how many iOSs have we had over the last 4 years? And this thing apparently has stuck around across multiple iOS, major version changes.
And when it's, often in messages or the browser that you find these exploits, because they have rendering engines that are basically code engines.
Right.
We've talked about that before. It seems like every operating system should have some sort of forensic log that is, permanent and unmodifiable.
Immutable.
An immutable forensic log. But maybe that's too much to ask. I don't know. It certainly would be a burden on resources. That's interesting.
Now, these things have so much RAM now. It's like,
we got some resources. I think my phone, frankly, is barely in use. I mean, it's just sitting there waiting for me to do something.
It may be the targeted nature of it, the fact that it deletes itself, and so Apple just doesn't have, the opportunity to get their hands on this, or I don't know. Really interesting though.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. If your IT training isn't raising your team to its highest level, you need ACI Learning. Prepare for certification examinations with practice questions. Retake tests so you're ready before you take your exam. Fill out the form at go.acilearning.com/twit for information on a free 2-week trial for your team.